Hey, I'm talking to you, handyman." The entire cafe heard it. Every single person. And not one of them said a word, because when a man like Brandon Mercer decides to humiliate someone, the room doesn't intervene. The room watches. The room goes quiet and watches and hopes it isn't next. The man he was talking to didn't look up, didn't tighten his jaw, didn't do anything at all except turn the page on the document in front of him, slowly, deliberately, like a man who had survived things so far beyond this moment that a bully in a suit barely registered as noise. Nobody in that cafe knew who he was yet. They were about to find out. If this story hits something in your chest, subscribe right now. Drop your city in the comments, and let's see how far this man's story travels. Ethan Walker arrived at the cafe at 7:42 in the morning, and the first thing he did was check the room. Not obviously. Not the way a nervous man checks a room, scanning for threats with his eyes wide and his shoulders up. He did it the way a man does it when the habit has been burned so deep into the muscle that it happens below conscious thought. A single unhurried sweep of the space that cataloged exits, occupancy, and anything that didn't belong, all in the time it takes most people to decide where to hang their coat. 2 exits, 41 people. Nothing that didn't belong. He found a corner table, sat with his back to the wall, another habit he'd stopped trying to break a long time ago. Set down his manila folder, ordered black coffee from a young waitress who smiled at him with the specific warmth people reserve for men who look like they've been carrying something heavy for a very long time and haven't complained once about the weight. "Rough morning?" she asked. "Not yet," he said. She laughed like that was funnier than he intended it to be. Maybe it was. He opened his folder, spread the estimates across the table. Construction costs, labor projections, materials, the math of keeping a small company alive, one contract at a time. This meeting with Paul Greer had to go well. 3 of Ethan's last 4 bids had come in second. Second place in contracting means exactly one thing. You go home empty-handed, and you sit across from your 8-year-old daughter at dinner, and you smile like everything is fine. Ethan was very good at smiling like everything was fine. He pulled out his phone. One message. Lily's school. He read it, closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds, put the phone face down, the permission slip again. He had signed it. He was certain he had signed it. Tuesday morning kitchen counter. Lily eating cereal and explaining the mating habits of emperor penguins with the intensity of a doctoral student defending a dissertation. Print another one tonight, he told himself. Don't forget. He never forgot things that mattered to Lily. He went back to his estimates. He had exactly 40 minutes before Paul arrived. He didn't get 40 minutes. Time. They came through this door like they owned the city. 4 men, mid-40s, suits that cost more than Ethan's truck. The kind of physical confidence that doesn't come from the gym, but from 20 years of never being told no. The confidence of men who have always been the most important people in every room they've entered, and have slowly stopped being able to imagine a world in which that isn't true. Ethan glanced up, filed the information, looked back down. Corporate, management, logistics based on the lanyards, conference in town, table at the center, of course. He turned a page. The one who sat at the head of the table, even though cafe tables don't have heads, was the broadest, the loudest, before he even spoke. The one whose eyes moved across the room with the automatic predatory ease of a man who has spent his career identifying leverage and weakness in other people. His name was Brandon Mercer, VP of Operations, 11 years at Continental Supply Group, a man who had a reputation in his industry for 2 things: closing deals aggressively and making subordinates cry in hallways. He would have told you the first one was a compliment, and the second one was a management philosophy. His eyes found Ethan. He studied him the way a man studies something he's already decided to dismiss, not with curiosity, but with the lazy contempt of someone who has categorized another human being in 3 seconds based on their jacket and their shoes, and found them wanting. He leaned toward the man next to him. "Look at this guy," he said, loud, deliberate, meant to be heard. "Bet he can't even afford the coffee." The table laughed. Ethan didn't look up. Divorced, right? Brandon continued, tilting his head with mock thoughtfulness. Definitely divorced. Handyman, probably here waiting on a plumbing job. More laughter, louder. The waitress near the counter found something urgent to look at on the far wall. A woman 2 tables away from Ethan set down her cup with a small, precise movement and stared at her phone with the focused attention of someone trying very hard to be somewhere else. Ethan turned a page. His hand was completely steady. In the far corner of the cafe, half hidden behind a laptop she hadn't looked at in 15 minutes, Victoria Hayes set down her tea. 51 years old. Founder and CEO of Hayes Global Logistics. 8,000 employees, 11 cities, a revenue figure that appeared in business school case studies. She had started the company in a 2-room office with a second-hand desk, and a conviction that she was right when everyone around her was telling her she was wrong. 22 years later, that conviction had been vindicated in ways she sometimes still found difficult to believe. She was in the cafe because she needed to be somewhere that wasn't her office. That was something no profile of Victoria Hayes ever captured, the fact that once a week, sometimes twice, she needed to sit somewhere ordinary and watch people live lives that weren't filtered through spreadsheets and liability assessments. It was the only thing that kept her grounded in the reality that her decisions were about human beings and not just numbers. She had noticed Ethan Walker when he sat down, not because he was remarkable to look at. He wasn't. He was average height, average build, the kind of face that doesn't immediately announce itself. But something about the way he sat, the specific settled stillness of him, had snagged her attention in a way she couldn't immediately explain. Now she watched Brandon Mercer dismantle him, joke by joke, in front of a room full of strangers. And she watched Ethan Walker absorb it. She had spent 22 years learning to read people. Board members, investors, competitors, regulators. She had learned to look past what people said and watch what their bodies confirmed or denied. Tension in the jaw. Tightening around the eyes. The micro-expression of anger that flashes across a face in a quarter of a second before the professional mask slides back into place. She watched Ethan Walker for all of these things. She found none of them. What she found instead stopped her cold. This man wasn't suppressing his reaction. He wasn't clenching beneath a calm surface. He was simply calm. Genuinely, completely, structurally calm. The kind of calm that doesn't come from privilege or indifference or emotional emptiness. The kind that comes from somewhere much harder and much deeper. Who taught you that, she thought. And then immediately after, what did you have to survive to learn it? Brandon Mercer was not finished. Men like Brandon are never finished until they get a reaction. The silence of the target isn't dignity to them, it's a locked door, and their instinct is always to push harder because they cannot conceive of a world where the door stays locked. Hey, his voice sharpened, carried further. Hey, I'm talking to you, handyman. The cafe went very still. Ethan looked up. And this is the moment that every person in that cafe would remember differently. Later, the reporters, the witnesses, the millions of people who would watch the footage, because what Ethan's face showed when he looked up was something that didn't fit any of the categories people expected. Not anger, not humiliation, not the tight, performed dignity of someone working hard not to show what they're feeling. Just attention. Clear, direct, completely unbothered attention. Like a man who has been interrupted while doing something important and is prepared to deal with the interruption as efficiently as possible before returning to what matters. "Can I help you?" Ethan said. Brandon blinked. He had not expected that. "Help me." He laughed, but it had an edge now. "Nobody. I don't think you can help me. I'm just wondering what the story is. You waiting for someone? Because you look a little." He gestured vaguely at Ethan's jacket, his folder, his entire presence, lost. "I have a meeting," Ethan said. "A meeting." Brandon repeated it to his colleagues with theatrical disbelief. "He has a meeting." He turned back. "Let me guess. With the foreman. With a contractor." "Oh." The smile widened. So you're the hired help. The room held its breath. Ethan held Brandon's gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Long enough to make the point without escalating. Long enough for Brandon to understand on some level he was choosing to ignore that the man he was mocking had made a decision about how to respond, and that decision was not going to change, regardless of what Brandon did next. "I hope you have a good morning," Ethan said. He looked back down at his folder. Brandon stared at the top of his head. Something shifted in Brandon's expression, not chastened, not embarrassed, but recalibrating, like a man who has thrown his full weight against a wall expecting it to break and found that the wall didn't even register the impact. He turned back to his colleagues, but his eyes went to Ethan one more time before he let it go. And in that look, that single brief retreating look, there was something small and dark that hadn't been there before. Victoria had stopped pretending to look at her laptop entirely. She had her teacup in both hands, and she was watching Ethan Walker with the focused, analytical attention she usually reserved for quarterly earnings presentations and hostile acquisition negotiations. 3 seconds, she thought. He held eye contact for exactly 3 seconds. Not 2, not 4. 3. That's not instinct, that's training. She had been in enough high-stakes rooms to know the difference between a person who was naturally calm and a person who had been taught rigorously, deliberately, under conditions she didn't want to imagine, to regulate their own responses with surgical precision. She opened a new browser tab. She typed Ethan Walker, Dallas contractor. She found his company website. Walker Construction. Small. 3 years old. Decent reviews. Nothing extraordinary. She closed the tab. She looked back at him. That's not a construction worker, she thought. That's not what a construction worker looks like from the inside. She was still turning that thought over when the door opened, and everything changed. She saw them before she heard them. 3 men, different from the morning crowd in a way that was immediately viscerally wrong, the kind of wrong that Victoria's instincts registered half a second before her conscious mind caught up and named it. They spread out. One toward the counter, one toward the back exit. One stayed at the front door. The positioning was deliberate, practiced, not the chaotic entry of people who had made an impulsive decision. The structured entry of people who had planned this, maybe not perfectly, maybe not professionally, but planned it. Victoria's hand went flat on the table. Don't move, she told herself. Don't draw attention. Assess. She had 11 seconds to assess before the first weapon came out. She used them. Nobody move phones out, wallets out right now. The voice detonated through the cafe like a physical force. The room erupted in 1 second of pure chaos. Chairs scraping a ceramic mug hitting the floor and shattering like a gunshot. A woman's scream cut short by the hand she pressed over her own mouth. Then the chaos compressed into something worse than chaos: stillness. The specific electrified stillness of 41 people who have just had their survival instincts override everything else, and are now frozen, waiting to understand whether they are about to live or die. Brandon Mercer's face had gone the color of old chalk. His hands were flat on the table, both of them, fingers spread, the posture of a man whose body had made decisions that his ego was not consulted on. The lead attacker moved through the room with the feverish energy of someone managing their own terror by projecting it outward at maximum volume. He was young, mid-20s maybe. Eyes too bright, voice cracking at the edges. Dangerous the way a cornered animal is dangerous not because of strategy, but because of the complete abandonment of it. He shoved a table, screamed at the counter, demanded compliance. He got it. From everyone. Almost. Victoria saw it happen in real time and still almost missed it. Ethan Walker stood up, not with the scrambling panic of a man reacting to chaos, not with the theatrical heroism of a man making a statement. He stood up with the quiet, deliberate economy of a man who had completed his assessment, arrived at a conclusion, and was now executing a plan that already existed fully formed in his mind before he moved a single muscle. He didn't rush. He didn't hesitate. He simply moved, and the word moved fails completely to capture what actually happened, because what happened was not movement in the ordinary sense. It was geometry. Angles and timing and the precise application of force at exactly the right point in exactly the right sequence, calibrated so specifically to the situation that it produced maximum effect with minimum noise. The first attacker didn't see it coming. One moment he had the room. The next moment he was against the wall, and the weapon was not in his hand, and he couldn't entirely process the sequence of events that had produced this outcome, because it had happened faster than his nervous system could narrate it. He tried to struggle. Ethan said very quietly, very close to his ear, "Don't." One word. The man stopped struggling immediately. Not because of the word, because of the absolute, unambiguous, zero negotiation certainty in the voice that said it. The certainty of a man who has said this word before in places far darker than this cafe, and has always meant it exactly as much as he means it now. The second attacker turned. He saw what had happened to the first. He made a decision. It was the wrong one. 4 seconds later, he was on the floor. The third, positioned at the door, stood completely still for one suspended moment, looking at the man in the worn work boots, and something moved across his face that was beyond fear and below calculation. Then he ran. The door hit the wall behind him. He was gone. Silence. Complete disbelieving silence. 41 people in a cafe in Dallas, Texas, sat perfectly still and stared at a man they had spent the last 20 minutes treating as invisible, and the silence had a texture to it, thick with recalibration, with the specific vertigo of realizing that the world is arranged very differently than you assumed 60 seconds ago. Ethan checked the two men on the floor. Methodical, thorough. He looked up. "Is anyone hurt?" His voice was the same voice, the exact same voice that had said, "I have a meeting." That had said, "I hope you have a good morning." Completely level, completely present. The voice of a man for whom the last 90 seconds and the 40 minutes before them existed on the same emotional register. The young waitress said very quietly, "No, I don't think so." Ethan nodded. "Someone should call 911, he said. He walked back to his table. He sat down. He picked up his coffee. Victoria Hayes did not move for a long time. Her hands were still wrapped around her cup of tea. Stone cold. She hadn't noticed. She was watching Ethan Walker sit at his table and drink his coffee, and exist in the aftermath of what he had just done with the same unhurried composure he had brought to reading his estimates an hour ago, as though violence and peace were simply two different modes he could enter and exit without leaving marks on himself. She had seen a lot of things in her life. She had built a company in an industry that didn't want her there. She had sat across from men who tried to crush her in negotiating rooms and had crushed them back. She had survived things she didn't discuss in interviews. She had never seen anything like this. Not the speed, not the precision. Those were remarkable, but they were mechanical feats of training and physical capability that once she recovered from the shock, she could file in a category she understood. What she could not file, what sat in her chest like a splinter she couldn't locate, was the after. The way he had returned to his table. The way he had picked up his coffee. The way his hands were not shaking. Who carries that much capability, she thought, and chooses this worn boots? $11 coffee he probably winced at paying for. A folder full of construction estimates. A meeting with a contractor. A life deliberately made small. Why would you make yourself this small? She didn't have the answer. But she understood with the instinct that had built her company and kept it alive through everything the world had thrown at it, that the answer mattered. That this man mattered. In a way she couldn't fully articulate yet, and wasn't going to dismiss just because she couldn't articulate it. She picked up her phone. She opened a new search. She typed 2 words, Delta Force. She stared at what came up. She looked back at Ethan Walker. She typed again, Delta Force operators after leaving service. She read, and the splinter in her chest became something larger and harder and more specific. Oh, she thought. Oh. The police arrived in under 4 minutes. Officer Rodriguez, 15 years on the force, the particular steadiness of a man who has responded to enough emergencies that surprise no longer lives in him. The way it lives in civilians took Ethan's statement in the methodical, efficient manner of a professional, recognizing another professional's work. "You have training," Rodriguez said, statement, not question. "I used to," Ethan said. "What kind?" A pause. The pause of a man deciding how much truth to give to a question he has answered many times in many contexts, always at the minimum necessary level. "Military," Ethan said. Rodriguez wrote it down. Then he looked up from his notepad, and for a single unguarded moment, the professional neutrality dropped just enough to let something genuine through. 11 seconds, Rodriguez said quietly. From the door opening to both of them down. My partner timed it on the footage. Ethan said nothing. "I've been on the job 15 years. Rodriguez continued, same quiet voice, like a man speaking to himself as much as anyone else. "I have never—" He stopped, clicked his pen, wrote something. "Thank you, Mr. Walker." "Just doing what needed doing," Ethan said. Rodriguez looked at him for one more moment, nodded slowly, moved on. Across the cafe, Brandon Mercer sat alone. His colleagues had drifted away to give their own statements. His coffee had gone cold. He was staring at the place on the floor where the two men had been restrained, and his face showed something that was not exactly an emotion he recognized in himself. He had laughed at this man. He had called him the hired help. He had performed his contempt for a table of colleagues who had laughed along, and it had felt like power, that specific insulated consequence-free power of men who have never been held accountable for the small cruelties they scatter through their days like litter. He had called him lost. And this man in worn work boots and a faded jacket who couldn't afford the coffee, had done something in under 2 seconds that Brandon Mercer could not have done with a year of preparation. Something shifted in his chest. Not remorse. Brandon Mercer had not had a developed relationship with remorse for a very long time, but something adjacent to it, something with an edge. He picked up his phone, opened social media, looked at the screen without seeing it. He didn't know yet that Sullivan had filmed the whole thing. He didn't know that 3 other people had filmed it. He didn't know that in 4 hours, 40 million people would watch a man in worn work boots do in 2 seconds what most people cannot do in a lifetime. He didn't know any of that. He just sat with the thing in his chest that didn't have a clean name. Victoria Hayes was the last customer to leave. She waited until the statements were done, until the room had thinned out, until Ethan Walker had shaken Rodriguez's hand and was repacking his manila folder with the same careful organization he had arrived with. She stood. She crossed the cafe. She stopped in front of his table. He looked up. Up close, she could see it even more clearly, the absolute structural stillness of him. The eyes that assessed without broadcasting the assessment. The complete absence of performance. "Excuse me," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Ma'am." The word landed in a way she wasn't expecting. "I'm Victoria Hayes." She paused. "I watched what you did." "Okay," he said, not modestly, not fishing for praise, just acknowledgement that she had spoken. "Are you all right?" He blinked, slightly. The smallest possible recalibration of an expression, as though the question had arrived from an unexpected direction. "I'm fine," he said. "Are you?" She almost laughed. Almost. "I'm fine," she said. She stopped, composed herself. "I wanted to make sure someone said thank you, directly, to your face." He held her gaze. "Lily's permission slip," he said. She blinked. "I'm sorry. I need to remember to print Lily's permission slip tonight," he said. "Before I forget. That's what I was thinking about when you came over." Victoria Hayes, who had negotiated contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars, who had faced down boardrooms and regulators and hostile competitors, who had not been caught off guard in a professional context in over a decade, stood in front of this man and felt for a reason she couldn't immediately name like she was going to cry. She didn't. "Who's Lily?" she asked. Something shifted in his face, subtle. The first crack in the stillness, not pain, not quite, but something tender and enormous, moving just beneath the surface. "My daughter," he said. "She's 8. Victoria nodded slowly. "Print the permission slip," she said. "Yes, ma'am." She left. She walked out into the Dallas rain, got into her car, and sat there for a long time with the engine running and her hands in her lap. In her right hand was her phone. On the screen was a single search result she hadn't closed. A military commendation. 7 years old, partially declassified. The name on it was Staff Sergeant Ethan D. Walker. The citation beneath the name described in the careful antiseptic language of official military documentation a series of actions in a location that was listed only as classified. Actions that had, according to the citation, preserved the lives of 11 civilians and 4 Allied personnel under conditions of extreme duress and at significant personal risk. The commendation was signed by a general. There were 3 additional commendations below it. Victoria read every word. Then she put the phone face down on the passenger seat and sat in the rain and tried to understand why her hands were shaking. Her hands. Hands that had signed off on billion-dollar decisions without trembling, and finally decided that sometimes the world reveals something true and unexpected, and it is not weakness to be moved by it. Print the permission slip, she thought. That's what he was thinking about. Print the permission slip. She put the car in drive. She had a lot of work to do. Paul Greer arrived 19 minutes late, breathless, apologizing before he was through the door, and found Ethan Walker at a corner table with a reorganized folder and a fresh cup of coffee. The waitress had brought it without being asked, surrounded by the quiet professional aftermath of the most extraordinary 11 seconds in the cafe's history. Paul stopped, looked around at the police tape near the back, the officers still finishing paperwork, the forensic markers on the floor, looked at Ethan. "What happened?" he asked. "There was an incident," Ethan said. "It's handled. Sit down." Paul sat down very slowly, like a man who is not sure the chair will hold reality properly right now. "Are you okay?" "I'm good. You want to look at Section 3? Ethan turned the folder toward him. "I think I found 2 places we can cut costs without touching quality, here and here." Paul stared at the documents, stared at Ethan, stared at the police tape, stared at Ethan again. "Yeah," Paul said slowly. "Okay, let's look at that." Ethan nodded, picked up his pen. Outside in the rain, a video was uploading to the internet. Inside, a man in worn work boots was showing a contractor how to save money on labor costs. Neither of them knew yet that by midnight, Ethan Walker's face would be on every screen in America. Neither of them knew yet what that would cost him. But somewhere across the city, Victoria Hayes was already pulling into her office parking garage, already picking up her phone, already making the first of many calls that would determine whether the truth about a man in a cafe was powerful enough to survive what was coming for him. And what was coming, what Brandon Mercer was already planning from the back seat of his town car, his jaw tight and his humiliation curdling into something with teeth, was going to be far worse than any robbery. Because robbers want your wallet. What Brandon Mercer wanted was much harder to replace. By 11 o'clock that morning, the video had 4 million views. By 1 in the afternoon, it had 19 million. By the time Ethan Walker pulled into his driveway, parked his truck, and walked inside to print a second copy of Lily's permission slip, the number had crossed 40 million and was still climbing, and his phone, which he had left on silent during the contractor meeting, had 312 missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize. He looked at the screen for a moment. Then he put the phone face down on the kitchen counter, poured himself a glass of water, and sat at the table where Lily ate cereal every morning and told him things about penguins. He sat there for a long time, He had known the moment it happened that phones were recording. He had registered it the way he registered everything in a room automatically without sentiment. He had made a calculation. In real time, cameras are rolling, act accordingly. He had used minimum force. He had controlled every movement. He had said the right words in the right order. He had done everything right. And he understood with the specific experienced clarity of a man who had spent a decade operating in environments where the wrong kind of attention could get people killed, that doing everything right sometimes did not protect you from what came next. His doorbell rang. He didn't move for 3 seconds. Then he stood up, walked to the door, and opened it. It was his neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, 72 years old, retired schoolteacher. She was standing on his porch holding a casserole dish covered in aluminum foil, and her expression was the complicated mixture of concern and excitement that people wear when something extraordinary has happened to someone they know, and they haven't yet decided which emotion to lead with. "Ethan," she said, "there are news vans on the street." "I know," he said. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Mrs. Calloway." She held out the casserole dish. "I made the chicken thing Lily likes." He took it. Something moved in his face that he didn't fully control, a brief unguarded flash of something soft and exhausted and grateful. "Thank you," he said. "Don't talk to those reporters without a lawyer," she said firmly, and turned around and walked back across the yard with the authority of a woman who had managed 32 fifth graders at a time and was not remotely intimidated by the news media. Ethan watched her go. Then he looked at the street. 3 news vans. 2 reporters already setting up cameras facing his house. 1 photographer who had the aggressive forward-leaning posture of a man who had already decided that Ethan's privacy was a professional obstacle rather than a human right. Ethan closed the door. He called the one person he always called when things became complicated. His sister answered on the second ring. "I already saw it," Rachel said before he could speak. "I've been watching it for 3 hours. Ethan, there are 47 million. I know. Your face is everywhere. I know, Rachel. Are you okay?" He paused. "I need you to pick up Lily from school today. Don't use the front entrance. Park in the back lot and text Mrs. Patterson to bring her out the side door." Silence on the line. "Ethan?" Her voice changed. "What's coming?" He thought about the video. About 47 million views and still climbing. About 3 news vans on his street. About the look on Brandon Mercer's face in the cafe, that specific recalibrating look of a man who had been humiliated in public and was already building a response. "I don't know yet," he said. "Just get Lily." "I'm already in the car," Rachel said. He hung up. He stood in his kitchen with Mrs. Calloway's casserole and his silent phone, and the knowledge that the life he had spent 3 years building into something quiet and manageable and safe was being looked at right now by 50 million strangers, and that not all of them were looking with admiration. He was right about that. He just didn't know yet how precisely right he was. Doug. Brandon Mercer's town car had barely cleared the cafe parking lot before his phone rang. It was Sullivan, his colleague, the one who had filmed everything. "Brandon?" Sullivan's voice was careful, in the way voices get careful when someone is delivering bad news to a man with a short temper and a long memory for grievances. "You need to see something." "I already know about the video," Brandon said. "Not that video." A pause. "Sullivan, there's another angle. Security camera from the coffee counter. It got everything, Brandon. It got everything from before. What you said to him, all of it." Silence in the town car. The driver kept his eyes on the road with the focused professionalism of a man who has learned that his job requires selective deafness. "How bad?" Brandon said. Sullivan was quiet for a moment that lasted about 3 seconds too long. "It's already on Twitter," he said. "Someone from the cafe uploaded it 20 minutes ago. It's Brandon. It's got 1 million views." Brandon stared out the window. In the background of his mind, the calculation was already running the automatic experienced assessment of a man who had navigated corporate politics for 20 years and understood that reputation was not a moral question, but a strategic one. Damage. Containment. Counter-narrative. These were the categories. Find the category, find the response, execute, before the story sets in the public mind like concrete. "Get me Hartwell," he said, his lawyer, already texting him. "And get me everything on this Walker guy. Everything. I want to know who he is, where he's from, what he's done. Whether there's anything at all that gives me a different angle on what happened in that cafe." Sullivan hesitated. "Brandon, the footage is pretty clear." "I said get me everything." His voice had dropped to the register that his colleagues had learned over 11 years meant the conversation was over. "I'll be in the office in 40 minutes. He put the phone down. He looked out the window at Dallas moving past him, the city he had worked in for 2 decades, the city where his name was on a corner office on the 23rd floor of a building that bore his company's logo on the side. His jaw was tight. He was not going to let a man in a denim jacket make him a punchline. He was absolutely not going to let that happen. The video that Sullivan had warned him about hit 10 million views by 2 in the afternoon. This one didn't show Ethan moving. This one showed Brandon talking. The cafe security camera had captured the whole exchange with the unblinking democratic impartiality of a lens that had no interest in anyone's preferred narrative. Brandon's voice carrying clearly across the room, the laughter of his colleagues, the specific words he had used. "Look at this guy. Bet he can't even afford the coffee. I'm talking to you, handyman." The internet, which has a complicated relationship with nuance, but an extremely simple relationship with hypocrisy, reacted with the speed and temperature of a chemical reaction. By 3 o'clock, Brandon Mercer's name was the second most searched term in the country. By 4 o'clock, journalists were outside Continental Supply Group's Dallas headquarters. By 4:30, his company's PR department had released a statement describing Brandon's comments as inappropriate and not reflective of Continental Supply Group's values, which satisfied nobody and enraged nearly everyone. At 4:47, Brandon Mercer walked into a conference room on the 23rd floor of his building and found his own lawyers sitting across from him with expressions that told him, before anyone spoke a word, that the situation had moved faster and further than his initial calculations had accounted for. "Tell me about Ethan Walker," Brandon said, sitting down. "Hartwell. 60 years old. Gray suit. The carefully cultivated manner of a man who is always the calmest person in any crisis, because he has seen enough crises to know that panic is a luxury." Slid a folder across the table. "Walker, Ethan Daniel. 35. Single father. His wife Sarah died of cancer 3 years ago. He has an 8-year-old daughter named Lily. He runs a small construction contracting company out of Dallas, 3 years old, modest revenue, legitimate operation. Prior to that," Hartwell paused. "Prior to that, the record gets complicated." "Complicated how?" "Military service. Enlisted at 19. Served for approximately 10 years. The specifics of his assignments are the word the Department of Defense uses is classified. Some of it is partially declassified. The parts that are publicly available suggest he was involved in special operations. Multiple deployments. His discharge was honorable." Another pause. "Decorated. Significantly decorated." Brandon stared at the folder. "Special operations," he repeated. "Delta Force is the most commonly cited unit in the online speculation," Hartwell said. "We haven't been able to confirm or deny. The military doesn't confirm or deny Delta Force rosters, but the physical capabilities displayed in the video are consistent with that level of training." The room was quiet for a moment. "So, I publicly mocked a Delta Force operator," Brandon said, flatly, like a man reading a sentence he did not write and does not enjoy. "That appears to be the current public understanding, yes?" Brandon set his jaw. "Here's what I need," he said. "I need an angle. Something that reframes what happened in that cafe as something other than what it looks like right now." Hartwell looked at him steadily. "Brandon, what happened in that cafe is documented from 6 different camera angles. The man stopped an armed robbery with his bare hands. The consensus legally and publicly is, "He used excessive force," Brandon said. The room went very still. Hartwell looked at him for a long moment. The two men he restrained were treated and released at Dallas Presbyterian. Neither sustained serious injuries. The police report indicates minimum necessary force was used. The responding officer stated on record, "The responding officer is not a lawyer," Brandon said. "And excessive force is a standard worth arguing." Two men were physically restrained without their consent by a civilian who had no legal authority to. Brandon. Hartwell's voice was quiet. Final. The voice of a man drawing a line. "I need you to hear me very clearly. I can file that suit. I will file whatever you ask me to file. But I need you to understand what happens to you publicly the day that lawsuit becomes news. You mocked this man on camera. He stopped a robbery. You then sued him for it. That is not a narrative you survive professionally. That is a narrative that ends careers." "My career is already on fire," Brandon said. "The question is whether I let it burn or whether I fight." Hartwell looked at him. Then he opened a different section of the folder. "There is one thing," he said carefully. Brandon leaned forward slightly. "Walker's company is small, 3 years old. He's in the middle of a bid cycle right now, several open contracts. If sufficient doubt is cast on his judgment, his methods, his character, contractors lose bids when there's controversy attached to their name. His company depends on those contracts. A prolonged legal dispute, regardless of outcome, could be enough pressure to make him settle," Brandon said, "or to make him disappear." Hartwell said quietly, "Without a fight." Brandon sat back. He looked at the folder. He thought about the café, about the way Ethan Walker had looked back down at his estimates after 3 seconds of eye contact, not defeated, not afraid, just done with the interaction, as though Brandon had been a minor weather event rather than a significant threat. He thought about how much he hated that. "File it," Brandon said. Ethan found out about the lawsuit the same way he found out about most things that happened outside the walls of his own life, from his phone, which he had finally turned back on at 6 in the evening, 40 minutes before Lily was due home. The news notification came through at 6:14. Breaking VP. Brandon Mercer files suit against Café hero Ethan Walker, alleging excessive force. He read it once. He set the phone down. He stood in his kitchen and looked at the wall for approximately 30 seconds with the expression of a man doing rapid internal calculations, not panicking, not despairing, but assessing the way he assessed everything with the methodical efficiency of someone who has learned that the first 10 seconds after bad news determines the quality of every decision that follows. Then he picked up the phone and called his lawyer. He didn't have a lawyer. He called his sister instead. Rachel answered immediately. "I saw it." "How's Lily?" "She's fine. She's in the living room watching a nature documentary about whales. She doesn't know anything yet. Ethan? How much do I have in savings?" A pause. "Why?" "Because I need to know what I'm working with." "Ethan, you cannot fight Brandon Mercer's lawyers on a contractor's savings account. This man has a legal team that—" "How much, Rachel?" she told him. He did the math in his head, quickly, the way he had done math in the field, not perfectly, not with time to verify, but fast enough to make a decision and commit to it before the window closed. It wasn't enough, not even close to enough to sustain a prolonged legal battle against a man with corporate resources and a law firm on retainer. He knew that. Brandon Mercer knew that. That was exactly the point. "Okay," Ethan said. "Okay." Rachel's voice climbed. "That's your response. Okay. I need to think." "Ethan, this man is going to bury you in legal fees before this ever sees a courtroom. That's the strategy. Don't you see that he doesn't need to win? He just needs it to cost you more than you have." "I know, Rachel." "Then what are you going to do?" He looked at the hallway leading to the living room, where the distant sound of whale documentary narration drifted through the quiet house. He thought about Lily, about the permission slip now folded and signed on the counter, about the school field trip to the Natural History Museum that she had been talking about for 3 weeks, about Sarah, about what Sarah would say right now if she were standing in this kitchen in this moment. She would say, "Don't you dare quit. I'm going to make dinner," Ethan said. "And then I'm going to figure out the next step." "That's it? That's your plan?" "That's step 1, he said. "Step 1 is always don't collapse. Everything else comes after." He hung up. He started making dinner. He did not collapse. Victoria Hayes found out about the lawsuit at 6:31 p.m. She was in her office on the 18th floor of the Hayes Global Building, working through a stack of contracts that had been waiting for her attention since morning, the morning that felt now like it had happened in a different week. She read the notification, read it again. Then she set down her pen, leaned back in her chair, and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. She had spent the afternoon doing 2 things simultaneously. The first was running her company. The calls, the decisions, the unrelenting operational demands of an organization with 8,000 moving human parts. The second, conducted in the margins of the first, was researching Ethan Walker. She had found the military commendations. She had found the record of his wife's death, an obituary from 3 years ago. Sarah Walker, 32 years old, survived by her husband Ethan and their daughter Lily. She had found the business registration for Walker Construction. She had found reviews from clients who used words like honest and reliable, and showed up on time and did exactly what he said he would do, which in the contracting industry was apparently remarkable enough to be worth mentioning. She had found a photograph, not a posed one, not a professional headshot, but a candid photo from a local news story about a community renovation project 8 months ago. Ethan was in the background of the shot, not the subject of it, holding a door open for an elderly woman carrying supplies. He wasn't looking at the camera. He wasn't performing anything. He just was. She had looked at that photograph for longer than she was willing to admit. Now Brandon Mercer was suing him. She picked up her phone, called her general counsel, a meticulous woman named Patricia Osei, who had been with Hayes Global for 9 years and had the specific quality of being able to assess legal situations at speed without sacrificing accuracy. "Patricia," Victoria said, "I need a brief. Excessive force doctrine in Texas civilian context, specifically as it applies to a private citizen intervening in an armed robbery. How fast can you get that to me?" "By morning." "By 9 tonight." A brief pause. 8:30, Patricia said. "Perfect." Victoria hesitated. "And I need everything publicly available on Brandon Mercer. Professional history, legal history, anything that's been filed, settled, reported, or rumored." Another pause, longer. "Victoria," Patricia said carefully, "should I be asking why?" "No," Victoria said. "You should be getting me the research." 8:30, Patricia said, and hung up. Victoria set the phone down. She looked out her window at the Dallas skyline, the city she had built, something in the city she had fought for 22 years to establish herself in, the city where a man in worn work boots had protected 41 people from armed attackers and was now being sued for it. Something hardened in her chest. She had spent her career navigating systems that were designed to reward people like Brandon Mercer and exhaust people like Ethan Walker. She understood those systems. She had beaten them more than once through a combination of preparation and endurance and the willingness to stay in the fight longer than the other side expected. She knew exactly what Brandon was doing. She also knew exactly how to do what he was trying to do, but better. The difference between them was simple. She was going to use it for the right person. At 8:47 that evening, Patricia Osei sent Victoria a 40-page research document. Victoria read the legal brief on Ethan first. It took her 11 minutes. What it told her was, the suit was weak. Not legally incoherent. Hartwell was too good a lawyer for that. But constructed on a foundation of ambiguity, rather than substance, designed not to win, but to last. Every week the suit existed was another week of legal fees for Ethan Walker, and another week of doubt attached to his name in the professional communities where his business depended on reputation. It was a slow bleed strategy. She had seen it before. She had survived one herself early in the company's life when a larger competitor had filed a nuisance suit designed to drain her resources during a critical growth period. She had won. It had cost her 18 months and nearly everything she had. Ethan Walker did not have 18 months. She turned to the second part of Patricia's document. Brandon Mercer's history. She read slowly. 3 pages in, she stopped. She went back, read the section again, then a third time. Then she picked up her phone and called Patricia directly. "The settlement from 2019, Victoria said. "The one with the former Continental employee. Do we know the terms?" "Sealed," Patricia said. "But the case file is public. The allegations before it settled were..." She paused. "Workplace intimidation, systematic harassment, specifically targeted at employees he perceived as vulnerable. 3 plaintiffs initially. 2 dropped out before filing. 1 settled." "1," Victoria said. "The amount is sealed. But the fact that Continental's legal team moved to settle within 60 days of filing suggests the evidence was..." Patricia chose her words with the precision of someone who has been a lawyer long enough to know that precision matters more than emphasis. "Significant." Victoria was quiet. "Patricia," she said, "is there a pattern here, beyond 2019? There are 2 other situations that didn't reach the filing stage. One in 2016, one in 2021. Both involved subordinates. Both ended quietly. The 2021 situation involved a junior analyst who left Continental 6 weeks after an internal complaint was filed. She now works in Atlanta. She's never spoken publicly." Victoria set the document down on her desk. She looked at it. She thought about a woman in Atlanta who had left her job and moved to a different city and never spoken publicly. She thought about 2 other situations that ended quietly. She thought about the specific, practiced ease with which Brandon Mercer had selected a target in a cafe and dismantled him in front of a room full of strangers, the ease of a man who had done this kind of thing many times in many rooms and had never once been held accountable for it. And she thought about Ethan Walker making dinner in his house tonight with his daughter, watching whale documentaries in the next room, trying to figure out how to protect everything he had built from a man who had decided that public humiliation was an insufficient punishment for the crime of not reacting the way Brandon expected. She picked up her phone one more time. She called the best litigation attorney she knew in Dallas. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Victoria, it's almost 9 o'clock. "I know," she said. "I have a case for you, pro bono." A pause. "You've never asked me for pro bono work in 15 years. "I've never had a case like this one," she said. "I'm sending you a file tonight. Read it before you sleep. Call me at 7 tomorrow morning." She hung up. She sat at her desk in the quiet of the 18th floor city lights, visible through the window, the 40-page document in front of her. She thought about a man who had returned to his table and picked up his coffee. She thought about print the permission slip. She thought about the specific crystalline clarity of a person who knows exactly what matters to them and has organized their entire existence around protecting it. She picked up her pen. She wrote 2 words at the top of a clean page. "Find everything." And somewhere across the city, in a house that now had news vans parked outside it, Ethan Walker was sitting at the kitchen table, helping his 8-year-old daughter with her spelling homework, reading the word she had written, telling her she'd spelled impossible wrong, watching her erase it and try again, and not telling her that the word felt at this particular moment uncomfortably personal. But he was still there, at the table, showing up. That was step 1. The lawsuit hit the news at 6 in the morning, not as a footnote, not as a legal brief buried in a business section. It hit the front page of every major outlet in Texas, and half the national ones, and the headline wrote itself so cleanly that every editor in the country used almost the same words: "Café hero sued by man who mocked him." By 7, it was the top trending story in the country. By 7:15, Ethan's phone had stopped counting missed calls because the number had exceeded what the display was designed to hold. He was already awake. He had barely slept. He had lain in the dark in the house that he and Sarah had chosen together. The house with the scuffed baseboards and the backyard that needed work, and the kitchen counter where he signed permission slips. And he had stared at the ceiling and done what he always did when a situation moved beyond his immediate control. He had cataloged what he knew, identified what he didn't, and made a list of the next 3 actions he could take, regardless of what anyone else decided to do. The list was short. Get Lily to school. Call a lawyer. Don't collapse. He got Lily to school. He used the side entrance. He told her the news vans outside their house were there for a story about the neighborhood, which was the kind of lie that a parent tells not to deceive but to protect, and which he intended to replace with an age-appropriate version of the truth, the moment he understood how the truth was going to land. Lily had looked at him in the car with Sarah's eyes, the particular penetrating look of a child who is smarter than the situation adults are constructing around her, and said, "Dad, is everything okay?" He had kept his eyes on the road. "Everything is fine, Bug." "You didn't eat breakfast." "I'll eat later." "You always say that, and then you don't." He had glanced at her then. 8 years old. Braids he had done himself at 6 that morning, slightly uneven on the left side, because his hands weren't as practiced as Sarah's had been, and probably never would be. Backpack with the penguin keychain she'd picked out herself. Permission slip in the front pocket signed present accounted for. "I'll eat," he said. "I promise." She had looked at him for one more second with those eyes. Then she had looked out the window. "Okay," she said, like she was deciding to believe him, like belief was a choice she was making consciously on his behalf. He drove the rest of the way with his jaw tight and his hands steady on the wheel. Marcus Webb had been a civil litigation attorney in Dallas for 19 years. He was the kind of lawyer that other lawyers called when a case was either very good or very bad, because he had the specific gift of being able to look at a legal situation in its early stages and understand with unusual accuracy what it was going to look like at its end. Victoria Hayes had called him at 9 o'clock the night before. He had read the file she sent him. He had not slept much either. He was waiting outside Walker Construction's office, a modest 2-room space in a commercial building on the east side when Ethan arrived at 8:15. Ethan looked at him, looked at the business card Marcus extended. Read the name. "Victoria Hayes sent you," Ethan said. It was not a question. She did. Why? Marcus considered this question with the seriousness it deserved rather than deflecting it. "She said she watched you in that cafe and she wanted to know if the world was still fair enough to do right by you. She wanted to give it a chance to be." He paused. "She also said you'd probably try to say no, and I should tell you that saying no is your right and also a significant strategic error." Ethan looked at him for a long moment. "She said all that?" Paraphrasing, she was more direct. Ethan unlocked the office door, held it open. "Come in," he said. They sat across from each other at the small desk that occupied most of Ethan's office space, and Marcus laid out the situation in the clear, unembellished language of a man who respects his client enough not to soften things that shouldn't be softened. The suit was weak on substance. That was the good news. The bad news was that weak suits could still take 18 months to resolve, and 18 months of litigation costs, public scrutiny, and professional doubt attached to his name could do to a small contracting company what Brandon Mercer's lawyers couldn't do in a courtroom: destroy it through attrition. "He's not trying to win," Marcus said. "He's trying to make you run out of money before you can prove him wrong." "I know what he's doing," Ethan said. "Then you understand that the legal strategy alone isn't sufficient. We need to move fast, file a counter-motion, challenge the standing, make noise of our own. And Victoria Hayes is funding this. Pro bono, my firm. She's not paying anything." Ethan was quiet for a moment. There was a specific discomfort in him that had nothing to do with fear. The discomfort of a man who has spent 3 years being fiercely, deliberately self-sufficient, who has built his life around the principle that he asks for nothing and takes care of his own being, told that someone has stepped in to help without being asked. "I don't know her," Ethan said. "She knows enough about you," Marcus said. Another silence. Ethan looked at the wall, looked back. "What do you need from me?" he said. Marcus put a legal pad on the desk. "Everything, from the beginning. Every detail of what happened in that cafe. Every word Brandon Mercer said. Every movement you made and the reason you made it. We build the record so clean and so complete that when we put it in front of a judge, there is no interpretive space left for Hartwell to operate in." Ethan nodded. "One condition," Ethan said. Marcus waited. "Lily doesn't get pulled into this. Her name, her school, her life, none of it becomes part of the public record." "Agreed. Non-negotiable." "I understand." Ethan picked up a pen. "Then let's start." Here, 3 floors above the Dallas County Civil Court Records Office, in a glass-walled conference room, at Hayes Global Victoria, Hayes was meeting with Patricia Osei and a woman she had flown in from Atlanta. The woman's name was Dana Reeves, 29 years old, former junior analyst at Continental Supply Group. She had left Dallas 2 years ago, moved to Atlanta, built a new life with the careful, deliberate energy of someone who has survived something they don't speak about and have learned to carry quietly. She had agreed to the meeting. That had taken 4 phone calls, 2 assurances from Patricia, and 1 direct call from Victoria herself, during which Victoria had said exactly 2 things. "You don't have to do anything, but I need you to know that what you went through is not finished hurting people." Dana had been silent on the phone for a long time. Then she had said, "Send me the flight, me." Now she sat across from Victoria with her hands flat on the conference table, the posture of a woman who has rehearsed a kind of stillness as a defense mechanism, and she said, "You found me." "I have good researchers," Victoria said. "Why do you care?" Not aggressive, genuinely asking. The question of a person who has learned to be suspicious of strangers who claim to want to help. "Because Brandon Mercer is doing to someone else what he did to you," Victoria said. "And this time, I was in the room when it started." Dana looked at her. "The man from the cafe," she said. "Yes. I saw the video." A pause. "I saw both videos." She looked down at her hands. "When I saw Brandon's face in that cafe, the way he talked to that man, I recognized it. That exact tone. That exact—" She stopped. "I recognized it." "I know," Victoria said quietly. "He never got in trouble for it. Not really. The settlement, I couldn't even tell anyone what happened. Sealed. I just had to leave. Start over." "You don't have to be sealed anymore," Victoria said. "If you're willing." Dana looked up. Her eyes were clear. Not tearful. Something steadier than that. The clarity of a person who has been holding something in a closed fist for a long time and is finally considering what it would feel like to open the hand. "What happens to me if I talk?" she asked. "Nothing," Victoria said. "The NDA covers your ability to disclose settlement terms. It does not prevent you from describing your experience of working at Continental Supply Group. It does not prevent you from filing an amended complaint with the EEOC. And it does not—" Victoria paused, chose the next words with precision. "Prevent you from speaking to a journalist on background about the culture Brandon Mercer created." Dana was quiet. "He'll come after me," she said. "He's busy," Victoria said, "and he's about to get considerably busier." Something shifted in Dana's expression. Slowly. Like a door that has been locked a long time, the mechanism still working but requiring effort. "I want to think about it," Dana said. "Of course." "But I didn't come all the way from Atlanta to say no," Dana said. "I came to see if you were real." Victoria looked at her steadily. "Am I?" Dana almost smiled. "I'll let you know." The first twist came at 11:15 that morning, and it came from a direction nobody anticipated. A retired U.S. Army general named Robert Carver held a press conference, not in response to any media request, not organized by any publicist or PR firm. He walked up to a podium outside the American Legion Hall in Plano, Texas, with 3 other men standing behind him. All of them in their 50s, all of them with the particular bearing of people who have spent decades in service and carry it permanently in the way they occupy space. and he read from a prepared statement in a voice that did not waver once. He did not name Ethan directly. He said only that a former operator under his command had been placed in an unjust legal situation as a consequence of protecting civilians, and that he and his colleagues were prepared to testify under oath to the character, the training, the judgment, and the service record of that individual. He looked directly at the cameras. This man, he said, spent a decade doing things in places you will never know about, so that people in cafes can drink their coffee without fear. The idea that he should be legally penalized for doing in that cafe what we trained him to do, what we asked him to do for 10 years in conditions most people cannot imagine, is an offense to every person who has ever worn a uniform and been asked to protect someone who cannot protect themselves. He folded the statement. "We will be present for every proceeding," he said. "We will not be quiet." He walked away from the podium. The footage hit the internet in real time. The comment sections erupted. Brandon Mercer's phone rang 17 times in the 4 minutes following the press conference. He didn't answer any of them. Hartwell called at noon. "We have a problem," he said. Brandon was in his office. He had been in his office since 7. He had not left for lunch. His assistant had brought him coffee twice, and he had drunk neither cup. "Tell me," Brandon said. "General Carver, you saw it." "I saw it. He's not the only one. We're getting calls from 3 retired military officers who are preparing formal declarations, character witnesses, capability testimony, documented service record. If even half of what they're describing makes it into the court record, the excessive force argument becomes—" Hartwell paused. "Untenable." The word landed in the office like something dropped from a height. "There's something else," Hartwell said. Brandon closed his eyes briefly. "Of course there is. The EEOC. We're seeing preliminary signals of a filing. Can't confirm the source yet, but the timing given everything public right now suggests someone who was previously unwilling to be public is reconsidering." Brandon stood up. Walked to his window, 23rd floor. Dallas spread out below him, the city that had been his professional home for 2 decades. "How contained is the 2019 situation?" he asked. A silence on the line that was 3 seconds too long. Hartwell. "The NDA covers the settlement terms," Hartwell said carefully. "It does not cover the underlying experience. If a former employee chooses to speak to the EEOC about the experience separate from the settlement, we are in a different conversation. Can we stop it? We can respond to it legally. We cannot prevent someone from speaking to a federal agency about their employment experience. That is not a thing we can do." Brandon turned from the window, sat back down. His face was very still in the particular way faces get still when the person behind them is doing rapid private calculations and doesn't want any of the work to show. "What are my options?" he said. Hartwell was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had shifted, not softer exactly, but more careful. "Brandon, I have been your lawyer for 11 years. In 11 years, I have found you options in situations that did not appear to have them. I am telling you now as your lawyer and as someone who has some investment in your long-term well-being that there is one option available to you that makes all of the other problems smaller." Brandon said nothing. "Withdraw the suit," Hartwell said. "Today. Issue a statement. Make it genuine, not a corporate non-apology, genuinely genuine. The news cycle moves fast. Right now, you are the story. Give it 72 hours and something else will be the story. But every day this suit exists is another day the reporters have a reason to dig, and the more they dig—" "No," Brandon said. "Brandon." I said no. Flat. Final. "Find me another option." Hartwell breathed out slowly. "I'll call you this afternoon." He hung up. Brandon sat at his desk for a long time. He was thinking about the cafe, about the way Ethan Walker had looked up from his folder with that expression, that clear, unimpressed, completely unbothered expression, and said, "I have a meeting." Like Brandon was a speed bump. Like Brandon was something you passed over and moved on from without checking your mirrors. He was thinking about how much he hated that. He was thinking about how much he had hated it then, and how much more he hated it now with General Carver on television, and the EEOC circling, and his own lawyers using words like untenable. He was not going to withdraw the suit. He would find another way. Ethan didn't see General Carver's press conference until 2 in the afternoon, when Marcus sent him a link with a single line of text. "You should watch this." He watched it alone in his office with the door closed. He watched the general stand at that podium in Plano and speak with the quiet, absolute conviction of a man who has made decisions in darkness and lived with them in daylight, and does not make statements he doesn't mean. When it ended, Ethan sat still for a long time. He had not spoken to General Carver in 3 years. Not since Sarah's funeral, where the general had shown up without announcement, stood in the back, and left before the reception. Had pressed Ethan's hand once briefly in the parking lot and said only, "You did enough. Go be her father," and walked away. Ethan picked up his phone. He called the general's number. The one that had been in his phone for 7 years, used 4 times. It rang twice. "I saw it," Ethan said. "I know you did," the general said. "You didn't have to do that." "No." A pause. "I wanted to." Ethan looked at the wall. "This is going to get complicated." "It's already complicated, son. The difference is, now it's complicated on your terms instead of his." "He's going to dig for anything he can use," Ethan said. "My record parts of it aren't pretty. Context matters, but context doesn't always survive a news cycle. Your record is your record," the general said. "Every action, every decision, every file, I will stand in front of any court in this country and explain the context. All of it. You were asked to do hard things in hard places, and you did them the right way every single time. Brandon Mercer is a man who bullied a waitress in a hallway and calls it leadership. The comparison does not concern me." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "How are the men?" he asked. It was the question he always asked, the only small talk he knew how to make with this particular person. "Getting old," the general said. "Angry about it, same as always." Ethan almost smiled. "Tell them I said—" "I'll tell them," the general said. "Walker, don't you lose this." He hung up. Ethan set the phone down. He sat with the weight of it. Not the legal weight, not the strategic weight, but the specific human weight of discovering that the people who know the worst and the best of you simultaneously are sometimes also the ones who show up when the world decides you're a convenient target. He had tried to be small. He had tried to disappear into a regular life, a honest life, a life that was entirely about Lily and work and the kind of quiet that doesn't make demands on anyone. The world had found him anyway. He stood up. He walked out of his office into the late afternoon, and the news vans were still there, and his phone was still overloaded, and somewhere in a 23rd floor office, Brandon Mercer was looking for another angle, but also somewhere across the city, a woman he barely knew had put her best lawyer on his side, and a retired general had stood at a podium in Plano and told the country who he was. He thought about what the general had said. "Don't you lose this." He got in his truck. He drove to Rachel's house to pick up Lily. He was not going to lose this. At 4:53 that afternoon, Patricia Osei sent Victoria a single text message. Dana Reeves filed with the EEOC at 4:47 p.m. On record, by name. Victoria read it at her desk. She set her phone down. She looked out the window. She had not made Dana do anything. She had not pushed, had not leveraged, had not applied any of the pressure that her position made available to her. She had simply told a woman in Atlanta that what happened to her was still happening to someone else, and she had given her the information she needed to make her own choice, and Dana Reeves had made it. That matters, she thought. How a thing is done matters as much as what is done. She had believed that for 22 years and built a company on it. She opened her laptop. She began to type. She was writing something she had been composing in her head since 9 o'clock the previous morning, since a cafe, and a man who returned to his table, and a question she couldn't stop asking herself: Who makes themselves this small on purpose? She now knew the answer. A man who has decided that the people he loves are worth more than the space he could occupy in the world. A man who could be enormous and has chosen instead to be present. A man who left everything he was capable of being so he could be one specific thing, a father, and has been that thing every single day, with the same discipline and commitment he brought to everything else in his life, only quieter. Only without anyone watching. She typed for 40 minutes without stopping. When she finished, she read it back once. Then she sent it to Marcus Webb. The subject line said, "For the court of public opinion when you need it." And in a house across the city, Ethan Walker was sitting at the kitchen table helping Lily with a school project about ecosystems, explaining the water cycle in terms she could draw. Watching her concentrate on her paper with her tongue slightly between her teeth, the way she always did when she was working hard, and he was present, completely, specifically deliberately present, in the way that only a person who understands how quickly presence can be taken away truly knows how to be. His phone was in the other room. The world could wait. His daughter needed help with the water cycle. He stayed. The courtroom was not what most people imagine when they picture justice being served. It was not dramatic. It was not cinematic. It was a Tuesday morning in a Dallas County civil courtroom with fluorescent lighting and wooden benches that had seen 40 years of human desperation, and the air had the specific quality of a room where too many difficult things have been said, and the walls have absorbed all of it. Ethan arrived early. Of course he did. He sat beside Marcus at the plaintiff's table, or rather the defendant's table, because Brandon had filed and Ethan was the one being accused, which still produced in Ethan a specific quiet fury he kept entirely below the surface, and he looked straight ahead, and he breathed at a normal rate, and his hands were flat and still on the table in front of him. Marcus leaned close. "How are you?" "Ready," Ethan said. "You don't have to say anything today. This is preliminary. Let me do the talking." "I know." "Ethan." Marcus waited until Ethan looked at him. "I've read your full service record. Everything General Carver sent over. Everything that's declassified and some things that aren't." He paused. "You've been in rooms considerably worse than this one." "Different kind of worse," Ethan said. Marcus looked at him. Fair enough. Brandon Mercer entered 7 minutes later with Hartwell at his side and 2 junior associates behind him carrying files. He was dressed precisely the suit of a man who understands that courtrooms are also theaters and has dressed for his role. He did not look at Ethan when he entered. He looked at the judge's bench, the gallery, the court reporter. He looked everywhere except the table where the man he had sued was sitting. That told Ethan everything he needed to know about where Brandon's confidence actually lived this morning. The gallery was packed. Not with spectators, the judge had restricted public attendance, but the press seats were full, and behind the press sat a row of faces that Ethan recognized without being told who they were. General Carver, in civilian clothes, sitting with the 3 men who had stood behind him at the Plano press conference. Military straight. Watching. Saying nothing. Their presence alone a statement that required no words. And 2 rows behind them in a charcoal suit, with her hands folded in her lap, and her attention focused with the precision of a woman who does not go anywhere without a reason, sat Victoria Hayes. Ethan had seen her come in. He had not turned around, but he knew she was there the way you know certain things, not by looking, but by the specific change in the air of a room when someone consequential enters it. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Everyone sat. It began. Yeah. Hartwell opened for Brandon with the polished confidence of a man who has argued in front of judges for 3 decades and has learned to make weak positions sound structural. He spoke about the standard of care owed by a civilian intervening in a public altercation. He spoke about the degree of force applied relative to the threat level. He used phrases like disproportionate response and absence of legal authority and duty to retreat in the careful, rhythmic cadence of someone building a wall, 1 brick at a time. He was good. Ethan had to give him that. Marcus sat through it with a yellow legal pad and a pen, and the complete focused stillness of a man who is not listening to the argument being made but to the gaps inside it. When Hartwell finished, Marcus stood. He did not use notes. "Your Honor," he said, "the plaintiff's argument rests on a single foundational claim that Ethan Walker used excessive force in restraining two armed individuals who had just committed armed robbery in a public space. Everything else, Hartwell has said, builds from that foundation." He paused. "We are going to remove that foundation completely. And once it's gone, the rest of the structure comes down with it." He turned. "The defense calls Officer Daniel Rodriguez." Rodriguez took the stand with the specific composure of a 15-year veteran who has testified in enough proceedings to have shed any residual nervousness about it long ago. He stated his name, his badge number, his years of service. He spoke clearly. He answered questions directly. Marcus walked him through it step by step. The response time, the scene as it was found, the physical condition of the two men who had been restrained, treated, and released at Dallas Presbyterian, no serious injuries, nothing that constituted harm beyond what was required to end an active armed threat. The positioning of the individuals relative to the civilians in the café. The timeline established by multiple video sources. Then Marcus asked the question he had been building toward. "In your professional assessment, Officer Rodriguez, did the actions of Ethan Walker in that café represent a disproportionate use of force relative to the threat present?" Rodriguez didn't hesitate. "No." "Did his actions represent the minimum necessary force to neutralize an active armed threat?" "In my assessment, yes." "In your 15 years responding to incidents in this city, have you seen a civilian response to an armed robbery that you would describe as more controlled than what you observed in that café?" Rodriguez was quiet for exactly 1 second. "No," he said, "I have not." Hartwell's cross-examination was professional and brief. He found no daylight. The first witness left the stand. The first mini-wall Hartwell had built came down. The second witness took longer to seat. He was a use-of-force expert, Dr. Leonard Marsh, formerly of the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, now in private practice. He had reviewed all 6 camera angles of the café incident, the physical evidence report, and the medical records of both restrained individuals. He spoke for 22 minutes in the careful, measured language of a man who has spent a career explaining violence to people who have mostly only read about it. His conclusion was not ambiguous. "What I observed in the video footage," he said, "represents a level of restraint that is frankly remarkable given the threat environment. The subject, Mr. Walker, neutralized 2 armed individuals in a public space containing 41 civilians in approximately 2 seconds without causing serious injury to either individual and without endangering any bystander. From a use-of-force analysis standpoint, this is close to the theoretical ideal." Someone in the gallery made a small sound. Not loud enough to be admonished. "To characterize this as excessive force," Marsh continued, "would require redefining the term in a way that is inconsistent with established doctrine, legal precedent, and basic physics." Hartwell stood for cross-examination. He tried 3 angles. Marsh closed all 3 with the patient precision of a man who has encountered these angles before and has already built the response into his original analysis. Hartwell sat back down. He wrote something on his legal pad. Brandon beside him looked at what he'd written. His jaw tightened. Ethan from the other table did not watch them. He was looking straight ahead. His hands were still flat on the table. Marcus touched his arm briefly. "Good." Just the one word, barely a murmur. Ethan nodded once. Then came the moment nobody in the courtroom had been briefed on. Marcus stood. "Your Honor, the defense requests permission to enter into evidence a series of sworn declarations from individuals with direct knowledge of the defendant's training service record and professional conduct." Hartwell was on his feet immediately. "Objection. Relevance. The defendant's military service history is not germane to the plaintiff's argument," Marcus said, not raising his voice, "rests on the claim that the force used was disproportionate. The proportionality of a response cannot be assessed without understanding the training and judgment of the individual responding. If the plaintiff wants to claim excessive force, the defense has the right to establish the standard by which that force was calibrated. The judge looked at Hartwell. Counsel. Hartwell opened his mouth, closed it. He was a good enough lawyer to recognize a trap he had walked into. I'll allow it, the judge said. Marcus opened a folder. The defense enters declarations from General Robert Carver, U.S. Army retired, and 4 additional former military officers with direct supervisory knowledge of the defendant's service record. He read from the first declaration. Not summaries, not paraphrases. The actual words that General Carver had written in the specific direct language of a man who has documented things his whole career and knows the weight that precise language carries. He described Ethan Walker's decade of service, the deployments, the decisions made under conditions of extreme duress, the specific disciplined restraint that characterized every use of force in Ethan's record, not the absence of capability, but the governance of it. The choice consistently made to use only what the situation required and nothing more. He described the day Ethan left the service, how he had walked into Carver's office and set down his identification and said simply, "My daughter needs a father more than the country needs another operator. I think I've paid my debt." And how Carver had stood up and shaken his hand and told him that a man who knows when to stop fighting is rarer and more valuable than a man who can't. When Marcus finished reading, the courtroom was completely quiet. Hartwell did not cross-examine the declarations. There was nothing to cross-examine. The second foundational wall came down. Brandon Mercer's face had not changed expression in 40 minutes. This was not composure. Ethan could see the difference from across the room, the difference between a man who is calm and a man who has locked every external indicator of what is happening inside him, because the alternative is letting the courtroom see it. The jaw slightly tighter than it needed to be. The right hand pressing flat against the table with just a little too much pressure. The eyes that moved to Hartwell every 60 seconds looking for reassurance and found only the careful neutrality of a lawyer managing expectations downward. Brandon had come into this courtroom this morning believing he still had angles. That his resources, his legal team, his 2 decades of navigating situations through force of will and financial pressure would be sufficient to make this go the way he needed it to go. He was beginning to understand that they were not. Hartwell leaned toward him during a brief recess and said very quietly, very precisely, "Brandon, I need you to hear me." "Tell me," Brandon said. "We are losing on the merits," Hartwell said. "Not close. The use of force argument is gone. Rodriguez Marsh, the military declarations taken together, there is no version of this that a judge decides in our favor on substance." He paused. "I want you to consider something. I told you before. I know what you told me. I'm asking you to hear something new." Hartwell's voice dropped further. "Dana Reeves filed with the EEOC 2 days ago. On record, by name. That is now a federal matter separate from this proceeding. Our ability to contain it legally is significantly reduced. The reporters in this gallery," a slight tilt of his head toward the press section, "have been making calls for 48 hours. 3 of them are close to having something they consider publishable on the 2019 situation. On 2016. Possibly on 2021. Brandon was very still. "If those stories run while this case is still active," Hartwell said, "the court of public opinion collapses what's left of our legal position. The judge reads the news. Judges are human, and we will be standing in this courtroom arguing that a decorated veteran used excessive force while the front page says you spent a decade systematically targeting people you perceived as vulnerable." He stopped. "Let it sit. I cannot win that." The recess was 3 minutes. Brandon spent 2 of them looking at the table. Then he looked at Hartwell. "If I withdraw," he said, very quiet, "what does that look like?" "Managed," Hartwell said. "Controlled. We write the statement ourselves. We move fast. We get ahead of the EEOC story. It's not good, but it's survivable." "And if I don't?" Hartwell said nothing. That was its own answer. Brandon looked across the courtroom at Ethan Walker, who was standing near the defense table talking quietly to Marcus, who was not performing anything, not gratitude, not triumph, not even awareness of being looked at, just standing there present. Attentive, a man in a room dealing with what the room required. The exact same man from the cafe. The exact same. Brandon had spent 2 weeks trying to understand why that infuriated him so much, and he had never fully arrived at an answer that satisfied him. But sitting in this courtroom, watching it happen again, that absolute structural unbotherness, he arrived at something close to it. He hated it because he had never had it. Not once. In 47 years. He had never once been in a room where someone tried to diminish him and not felt it. Never once absorbed an insult without it drawing blood somewhere underneath however many layers of aggression and confidence and expensive suits he piled on top. Every attack he had ever made on another person was a brick in a wall he was building around something vulnerable. And he had been building so long he'd forgotten what the vulnerable thing was. He looked at Ethan Walker. A man who had nothing to prove, had nothing to hide. Brandon had spent his entire adult life proving things. He turned to Hartwell. "Draft the statement," he said. Marcus received the call at 11:47. He stepped out of the courtroom into the hallway, listened for 90 seconds, said, "Understood" twice, and "yes" once, and came back in with an expression that was professionally controlled over something that was not controlled at all. He sat beside Ethan, leaned close. "He's withdrawing," Marcus said. Ethan looked at him. "When?" "Filing papers this afternoon. His lawyer is requesting a brief recess to prepare documentation." Ethan was quiet. He looked at the table, at his hands flat and still on the surface of it, the same way they had been flat and still in the cafe, the same way they had been flat and still through every part of this. "Okay," he said. Marcus stared at him. "Ethan, he's withdrawing. The case is done. You—" "I know," Ethan said. "You could show a little." "I know, Marcus." Something moved in his face, not a smile, not quite, but the small interior shift of a man who has been holding a great deal of weight and has just felt a portion of it lift. "I know." Marcus looked at him for a moment. Then he leaned back, let out a breath that had been in his chest for 2 weeks. "Your general is going to be insufferable about this," Marcus said. Ethan almost laughed. Almost. In the gallery, General Carver had received the same information through a different channel, and his expression, the expression of a man who has operated in high-stakes environments for 4 decades, showed exactly as much of what he was feeling as he chose to show, which was nothing. But his right hand pressed once against the arm of the man beside him. Brief, deliberate. The man beside him nodded. 2 rows back, Victoria Hayes received a text from Patricia. She read it. She set her phone face down on her knee. She looked at the back of Ethan Walker's head from 20 feet away. She felt something release in her chest that she hadn't fully realized was clenched. The judge granted the recess. In the hallway outside the courtroom, in the particular non-space of a public building corridor that has absorbed too much human drama to feel neutral, Hartwell submitted the withdrawal paperwork to the clerk with the efficient forward-facing energy of a man who has already pivoted to the next problem. Brandon stood apart from his associates, near the window, looking out. He heard footsteps, turned. Ethan Walker was walking toward him, alone. No Marcus. No one. Brandon straightened. Some instinct old defensive moved through him. Ethan stopped 3 feet away, close enough for a private conversation, far enough that it was clearly not a confrontation. He looked at Brandon for a moment without speaking. Brandon waited. His jaw was set. His arms were at his sides. He had been preparing in the back of his mind for various versions of this moment for 2 weeks. The version where the man across from him was angry or contemptuous or victorious in the specific grinding way of someone who has won and wants you to feel the full weight of it. He was not prepared for what actually happened. "I'm not going to tell you it didn't matter," Ethan said. "What you said in that cafe. My daughter saw some of it online. She asked me if that man was right about us not being able to afford things. He paused. She's 8. She shouldn't have had to ask that question. Brandon said nothing. I'm not telling you that to make you feel bad, Ethan said. I'm telling you because I think you should know what it actually costs when you do that to someone. Not the legal version, the real version. He looked at Brandon steadily, not with anger, not with the performance of forgiveness, with the specific grounded directness of a man who says what he means and means exactly what he says. I hope you figure out what you're trying to prove, Ethan said. Whatever it is, I genuinely hope you figure it out. He turned and walked back toward the courtroom. Brandon stood at the window. The Dallas skyline was out there, the same city, the same view he'd had from the 23rd floor for 2 decades. He had stood at windows, looking at it more times than he could count, and it had always felt like something he owned the city. The view, the confidence of a man whose name was on the corner office. It did not feel like that right now. He pressed his palm flat against the glass. He thought about a question he had never let himself ask for very long, because the answer was uncomfortable. What am I trying to prove? He didn't have an answer. But for the first time, in a very long time, standing in a courthouse hallway, while a man in worn work boots walked away from him without looking back, the question stayed. The withdrawal was filed at 2:14 p.m. By 3 o'clock it was public. By 3:30 Marcus had sent Ethan a message that said, only, done. Go home. Ethan was already in his truck. He had left the courthouse through the side entrance, avoided the reporters, driven across the city with the radio off and his window down, and the Dallas afternoon air moving through the cab with the specific indifference of weather that has no opinion about human legal proceedings. He parked in front of Rachel's house. He sat in the truck for a moment. His phone was ringing. He knew without looking that it was reporters' colleagues, people from his past he hadn't spoken to in years, people from the internet who didn't know him and felt they did. He did not look at it. He got out of the truck. He walked to Rachel's front door. It opened before he could knock. Rachel looked at him. She had been crying, not recent crying. Old crying, the dried evidence of hours that had preceded whatever composure she was wearing now. She looked at her brother in the doorway, and her face did something complicated, and she said simply, "Come in." Lily was at the kitchen table. She looked up when Ethan came in. She had been drawing the ecosystem project, the water cycle pencil lines on white paper. She looked at his face with those eyes, Sarah's eyes. The eyes that missed nothing. "Dad," she said. "Hey, Bug. Are you okay?" He crossed the room. He sat down in the chair beside her. He looked at her drawing the water cycle arrows moving in circles, the sun in the corner, the ocean at the bottom, small fish that she had added because she said ecosystems without animals were sad. "Yeah," he said. "I'm okay." She looked at him for one more second with that specific inherited assessment. Then she held up her paper. "Does the sun go here or here?" She pointed to 2 different positions. He looked at it seriously. The way she deserved. "Here," he said, pointing. "Because it needs to be able to reach everything." She nodded, moved the sun, kept drawing. He watched her work. The weight of the day, the courtroom, the declarations, the hallway. Brandon Mercer pressing his palm against a window. It didn't disappear. It settled. Found its place in the collection of things he had carried and survived and continued past. It became one more thing in the category of hard things that had not beaten him. The category was large. He was still here. Rachel appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee and the expression of a woman who has been furious and terrified on someone's behalf for 2 weeks and has no idea how to transition out of it. She handed him a cup. He took it. She sat across from them and watched her niece draw fish in an ecosystem, and her brother be completely quietly present, and after a while she stopped trying to find words for it and just let it be what it was. Outside, across the city, the news was running his name again. Inside, Ethan Walker was helping his daughter figure out where the sun went. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything. At 6:47 that evening, Victoria Hayes sent Ethan a single text message. It took her 4 drafts to arrive at 6 words. It went the way it should. He read it in Rachel's kitchen between the water cycle drawing and the dinner Rachel was making that smelled like something he hadn't eaten in a long time. Something that smelled like a normal evening, an ordinary life. The specific gift of Tuesday that doesn't announce itself. He looked at the message for a moment. He typed back 5 words. Thank you. For all of it. He set the phone down. He looked at Lily. What do penguins have to do with the water cycle? He asked. She looked at him like the answer was obvious. They live in it, she said. He thought about that. Fair point, he said. She went back to drawing. He picked up his coffee. He stayed. The world moved on the way the world always does, loudly, briefly, and then completely. The headlines that had carried Ethan Walker's name for 2 weeks cycled through their natural lifespan and gave way to the next story, and the one after that, and the relentless, indifferent churn of news that consumes everything eventually, and moves on without looking back. The news vans left his street. The missed calls tapered, the notifications slowed to a trickle and then to silence. Dallas returned to being Dallas. And Ethan returned to work. Not because the attention had broken him and he was retreating. Because work was what he did. Because Walker Construction had 3 active bids and 2 contracts in progress, and a crew of 4 men who had families of their own and showed up every morning expecting their boss to show up too. Because the life he had built, the deliberate, purposeful, honestly earned life, did not pause for viral moments or courthouse drama, and he had not wanted it to. He was on a job site at 7 in the morning the day after the withdrawal. Hard hat, work boots the same ones, coffee from a gas station because $11 Café coffee was still not something he was going to normalize in his budget. He walked the site, reviewed the progress, answered questions from his crew with the same focused attention he gave everything, and by 8 o'clock it was simply a Tuesday. His foreman, a broad-shouldered man named Darius, who had worked with Ethan since the company's first year, fell into step beside him during a morning walkthrough and said nothing for a full 2 minutes, which was Darius's way of indicating he had something to say and was deciding how to say it. "You good?" Darius finally asked. "Good," Ethan said. "The guys wanted me to say something." Ethan glanced at him. "Say it." Darius was quiet for a beat. "They said to tell you that when this whole thing started, the lawsuit, the news, they talked about it, among themselves, and nobody looked for another job." He paused. "Nobody even thought about it." Ethan stopped walking. He looked at the site, at the 4 men working at the far end, none of whom were looking at him, all of whom had made a quiet decision that apparently required no announcement. Something moved through him that he didn't fully close off in time. "Tell them I said thank you," he said. "Already did," Darius said. "They said you'd say that." He walked ahead. Ethan stood still for a moment. Then he picked up his clipboard and kept moving. Dion. 3 weeks after the withdrawal, Brandon Mercer resigned from Continental Supply Group. The announcement came on a Friday afternoon, the corporate communications equivalent of burying something in the backyard, released at 4:55 p.m., when the news cycle was winding down and attention was elsewhere. The company's statement described it as a mutual decision reached after reflection on the company's values and future direction, which was the precise language organizations use when someone has been asked to leave, but everyone has agreed to call it something else. By Monday morning, the EEOC investigation into Continental Supply Group's workplace culture under Brandon Mercer's leadership was the story that replaced it. Dana Reeves gave one interview. A single, carefully chosen conversation with a journalist she had vetted for 3 weeks before agreeing to speak. She sat across from that journalist and described in the measured, specific, completely credible way of a person who has rehearsed nothing because she has lived it what it had been like to work at Continental. What Brandon Mercer had done. What it had cost her. What the sealed settlement had required her to carry silently for 2 years. She did not cry in the interview. She had said everything she needed to cry about in private long ago, And what was left was clearer and harder than tears. The interview ran on a Wednesday. By Thursday, 2 other former Continental employees had contacted the journalist independently. The story, which had begun as a Café video and become a lawsuit and then a withdrawal, became something larger, a reckoning with a specific kind of power that operates in professional spaces without consequence for years, protected by NDAs and institutional silence and the reasonable fear of people who cannot afford the fight. Ethan read the Dana Reeves interview once in the evening after Lily was in bed. He read it straight through without stopping. When he finished, he sat with it for a long time in the quiet of his kitchen. He thought about a woman who had gotten on a plane from Atlanta because Victoria Hayes had told her the truth was still hurting someone else. He thought about courage that doesn't look like action movies. The kind that shows up in an interview chair and speaks clearly and lets itself be seen by strangers. He typed a message to Victoria. She was remarkable. Victoria responded in under a minute. She always was. She just needed to know it was safe. He put the phone down. He looked at the kitchen counter where the permission slip had been. Long since signed and returned and processed and forgotten by everyone except him. He thought about how small the beginning of things can look. The first time Victoria came to the house, it was because of a leaking pipe. This is the unglamorous truth of how things actually develop between real people, as opposed to the version where meaningful relationships announce themselves with appropriate gravity and circumstance. Ethan had mentioned in passing during one of the calls that had become increasingly regular over the 3 weeks since the courthouse that he had a pipe under the kitchen sink that he kept meaning to fix and kept not getting to. Victoria had said with the directness that was simply how she communicated that she was driving past his neighborhood anyway, and she could stop. He had said that wasn't necessary. She had shown up 40 minutes later, not to fix the pipe. She was a CEO, not a plumber, a distinction she made immediately and without apology. She showed up because the calls had been getting longer and the content of them had been moving away from the lawsuit and toward everything else, and she had decided in the practical, forward-moving way she decided most things that whatever this was deserved more than a phone. Lily answered the door. This was not planned. Ethan had been under the kitchen sink when the doorbell rang and had called out for Lily to check who it was. Lily opened the door and looked at Victoria with the direct, unfiltered assessment of an 8-year-old who has not yet learned to disguise her evaluation of strangers. "Are you the CEO lady?" Lily asked. Victoria blinked. "Excuse me. Dad said a CEO helped us. Are you her?" A pause. "I'm Victoria," she said. Lily considered this. "I'm Lily." She stepped back from the door. "Dad's under the sink. He's been under there for a long time. I don't think he knows how to fix it." Ethan emerged from under the sink, at that moment heard the last sentence, and looked at his daughter with the expression of a man who would like to object, but cannot in good conscience do so. Victoria was standing in his doorway trying very hard not to smile. "She's not wrong," Ethan said, standing up, wiping his hands on a cloth. "I genuinely cannot figure out where the leak is coming from." "I cannot help you with that," Victoria said. "I know." "I brought food," she said. She held up a bag that smelled like the kind of Thai restaurant where the portions are enormous, and the decor has never been updated, and the food is extraordinary. Lily's head turned toward the bag with the focused attention of a child who has just completely revised her assessment of a stranger. "I like her," Lily said to no one in particular and walked toward the kitchen. Ethan looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Ethan. "Sorry about her," he said. "Don't be," Victoria said, and meant it completely. They ate at the kitchen table, the 3 of them. Thai food in containers because nobody had plated it, and Lily monopolized the conversation for the first 20 minutes with a detailed account of a disagreement she'd had with a classmate about whether narwhals were real, a subject on which she had extremely strong feelings and substantial evidence. Victoria listened with her full attention, asked questions, took Lily's side on the narwhal dispute, with the conviction of someone who had researched the matter, which she had not, but recognized immediately which position was correct. "They're absolutely real," Victoria said. "I've seen documentation." "That's what I said," Lily said, with the vindicated intensity of someone whose position has finally been recognized by an authority figure. Ethan watched Victoria listen to his daughter, and something happened in his chest that he hadn't felt in 3 years, something warm and slightly destabilizing, the feeling of a door opening in a room you had locked and forgotten about, and come to think of as just a wall. He looked away. He focused on the food. After dinner, Lily went to her room to read, delivering an exit that was confident and immediate in the way of children who have decided the adult portion of the evening is no longer relevant to them. Ethan and Victoria sat at the kitchen table with the empty containers between them and the particular quiet of two people who have run out of practical things to discuss and are now in the territory that the practical things were covering. Victoria spoke first. "She looks like you," she said. "She looks like her mother," Ethan said, automatic. Then a beat later, "Sometimes, the eyes." "You talk about her carefully," Victoria said. "Not an accusation, an observation." "Sarah." "Yes." He looked at the table. "She was—" He stopped, started again. "She was the person who made me make sense. When I came back from deployment the last time I was carrying things, and she didn't try to fix it. She just stayed, and eventually the weight redistributed. I don't know how else to describe it." Victoria was quiet. "She sounds like someone I would have liked," she said. "You would have," Ethan said. "She didn't put up with anything that wasn't real. You would have gotten along immediately, and I would have been slightly terrified of both of you in the same room." Victoria smiled. And it was a different smile than the controlled, public-facing expression she wore in boardrooms and press conferences. Something that reached further, landed differently, belonged to a version of her that didn't perform anything. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes. The cafe, when he was saying those things, what were you actually thinking?" Ethan considered the question with the seriousness she had given it. "Permission slip?" he said. She stared at him. "Genuinely," he said. "I was thinking about the permission slip, and whether the bid numbers in my folder were going to be enough to save Paul money without cutting quality, and whether the coffee was worth $11. A pause. "And yes, I heard every word he said, and yes, it registered. I'm not made of stone. But I've been in rooms where the words coming at me were considerably more dangerous than that. You develop not indifference, more like perspective. You learn what actually requires a response and what doesn't. And he didn't require one. He required exactly what he got," Ethan said. "Nothing." She looked at him. "That's the thing I couldn't understand," she said. "In the cafe, I kept watching you and thinking this man is not suppressing anything. He's just organized. On the inside." "Organized," he repeated. "Is that insulting?" "No," he said. "That's probably the most accurate thing anyone's said about me in years." She smiled again. The real one. The pipe under the sink dripped twice distantly, reminding both of them it existed. "I'll call someone tomorrow," Ethan said. "That's probably wise," Victoria said. "Ishini." The twist that nobody saw coming arrived 6 weeks later, not in a courtroom or a news cycle, but in a letter. Ethan found it in his mailbox on a Thursday morning, a standard envelope, no return address, Dallas postmark. He opened it at the kitchen counter before Lily came down for breakfast. Inside was a single page. No letterhead. Handwritten. He read it. He read it a second time. He set it down. He picked up his phone and called Marcus. "I got a letter," Ethan said. "From who?" "Brandon Mercer." A silence on the line. "What does it say?" Marcus asked carefully. Ethan looked at the page. "He says—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "He says he's been in therapy for the first time in his life. His lawyer suggested it. His wife suggested it before, that apparently for years, and he didn't listen. He paused. He says he's been thinking about what I said in the hallway, about what he's trying to prove. Another pause. He says he doesn't fully know the answer yet, but he thinks he's getting closer. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. That's not what I expected, Marcus said. Me neither, Ethan said. What are you going to do with it? Ethan looked at the letter. A man's handwriting, not polished, not the typewritten distance of legal documents. Actual handwriting, slightly uneven. The evidence of someone writing something real rather than something crafted. I don't know yet, Ethan said. He folded it, put it back in the envelope, put the envelope in the drawer where he kept things that mattered but didn't have a category yet. He made breakfast. Lily came down and told him everything she knew about the migratory patterns of Arctic terns, which was, as usual, a surprising amount. He listened. He did not think about the letter again until that evening when Lily was in bed and the house was quiet, and he sat at the kitchen table in the specific, spacious silence of a house at night. And he took the letter out and read it one more time. He sat with it for a long time. Then he got a piece of paper. He wrote 2 sentences. I received your letter. I think getting closer is enough to start with. He folded it. Addressed the envelope he had looked up. The address, it took him 3 minutes. It was publicly available and set it by the door to mail in the morning. He was not forgiving Brandon Mercer. Forgiveness is a longer and more private process than a 2-sentence letter, and Ethan had no illusions about that. He was not excusing what had been done. He was not erasing Lily's question about whether they could afford things, or the 2 weeks of legal terror, or the night he had sat in the dark and stared at the ceiling and made his list and started with, "Don't collapse." He was doing something smaller and more specific than forgiveness. He was acknowledging that a person had written something real, and that real things deserve acknowledgement. That was all. That was enough. 4 months after a rainy Tuesday in a cafe, Ethan Walker attended Lily's school performance. She was a fish. This was her role in the 2nd grade spring production, which was about ecosystems. Her class had been studying them all semester, and she had been assigned the role of a deep-sea fish with a bioluminescent light on its head. A costume she had helped design herself with a level of scientific accuracy that had impressed her teacher and slightly alarmed the parent volunteers who had to construct it. Ethan arrived early. He sat in the 3rd row. He did not know until 5 minutes before the performance began that Victoria was going to be there. He had mentioned it in the way he mentioned most things to her now, in the natural, unstudied flow of 2 people who have stopped editing themselves around each other, and she had said simply that she would try to make it. He had not expected her to actually come. She sat beside him 3 minutes before the lights dimmed. No announcement. She just appeared and sat down and said quietly, "Which one is she?" "She's the anglerfish," he said. "Of course she is," Victoria said. The performance was the specific joyful chaos of 2nd graders doing theater, some too loud, some too quiet. One child who forgot their lines and was visibly rescued by the teacher off stage. Another who improvised a dance sequence that bore no relationship to the script, but was unambiguously the highlight of the show. Lily delivered her 3 lines with the focused intensity of someone who has rehearsed them approximately 400 times, and then spent the remainder of the performance completely committed to being an anglerfish, which meant a series of slow, deliberate movements that she had apparently based on actual anglerfish footage she had watched online. Ethan watched her. He watched her the way he watched everything completely, without dividing his attention, giving her the full weight of his presence. He watched her find him in the audience from the stage, the small flicker of recognition in her eyes, the way her posture changed almost imperceptibly when she confirmed he was there. He was always there. He was always going to be there. Victoria watched him watch Lily and understood something she hadn't had words for in 4 months. The thing she had seen in the cafe and couldn't name, and had spent the intervening time slowly, carefully learning the shape of. It was not composure. It was not capability. It was not the disciplined, trained stillness of a soldier or the careful guardedness of a man who has survived loss. It was devotion. Specific, unglamorous, daily renewable devotion to something he had decided was worth every cost. a form of strength that doesn't require an audience. The kind that shows up at 7 in the morning and makes breakfast and does braids that are slightly uneven on the left side, and drives to school and comes home and sits at the kitchen table and stays. After the performance in the outdoor area, where families gathered with juice boxes and congratulations, Lily found them and launched herself at Ethan with the full, unself-conscious momentum of an 8-year-old who has just completed a major artistic undertaking and needs to report on it immediately. "Did you see me?" she said into his shoulder. "I saw every second," he said. She pulled back, looked at Victoria. "Did you see the part where I moved like this?" She demonstrated the anglerfish movement. "That was my favorite part," Victoria said with complete honesty. Lily considered her. Then she looked at her father. Then back at Victoria. "Are you going to come to more things?" she asked. The question landed in the outdoor air with all the simple, devastating directness that only children can achieve, the kind of question that bypasses every defense and every careful framing and goes straight to the actual matter. Ethan looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Ethan. Something passed between them. Not a decision exactly, because the decision had been assembling itself for 4 months without either of them naming it. More like a recognition. The moment when two people who have been circling something finally look at it directly and find that it's exactly what they thought it was. "Yes," Victoria said. She looked back at Lily. "If your dad is okay with that." Lily looked at her father. Ethan looked at his daughter. At Sarah's eyes looking back at him with their specific, penetrating clarity, and he thought not for the first time that Sarah would have liked Victoria. That Sarah would have recognized her. That Sarah, who had always been better than him at knowing when something was real, would have known immediately. "Yeah," he said. "I'm okay with that." Lily nodded. The matter in her assessment was settled. She reached for the juice box Victoria was holding. "Can I have that?" Victoria handed it over. Lily walked toward a cluster of her classmates' juice box in hand, already reporting on the performance with the authoritative energy of a lead cast member, leaving 2 adults standing in the amber light of a Dallas evening with the particular quiet of people who have just stepped together across a threshold. Months later, when things had settled into the shape of what they were going to be, Victoria sat with Ethan on the bleachers after one of Lily's soccer games. Lily had decided in the weeks following the spring performance that she also needed to be an athlete, which Ethan had supported completely, and which he now spent every Saturday morning supporting from the sidelines. The game had ended. Lily was on the field with her teammates doing something that involved a great deal of running with no apparent destination. Victoria said quietly, "When I first saw you in that cafe, I thought I was looking at a dangerous man." Ethan turned to her. "And now," he said. She watched Lily run across the field full speed, absolutely committed, no hesitation, completely certain that whoever she was running toward would be ready when she got there. "Now I think you're the safest man I've ever met," Victoria said. He held that. Not the compliment. The specific truth of it. The thing she was actually saying, which was not about his training or his capability or his record or anything the world had spent 2 months debating. She was saying that the thing she had seen in the cafe, the thing she had spent 4 months learning the shape of, was real. That it held. That it was worth trusting. He looked at Lily. He thought about Sarah. He thought about the permission slip. He thought about step 1, don't collapse. He had not collapsed. He reached over and took Victoria's hand. Not dramatically, not with announcement. Just took it the way you take something you've decided belongs with you, and held it and watched his daughter run across a soccer field in the amber light of a Saturday morning in Dallas, Texas. The world was imperfect. It had always been imperfect. It had cafe bullies and legal harassment and sealed settlements and the specific injustice of powerful men who mistake access to resources for immunity from consequence. It had loss and medical bills and 2 weeks of news vans on the street and a drawer full of things that mattered but didn't have categories yet. It also had this: a man who had chosen every single day without applause, without audience, to be present for the people he loved. A daughter who trusted him enough to run full speed and not look back. A woman who had seen him clearly from the beginning and kept looking. And a Tuesday morning in a cafe that had cost him everything except what actually mattered and had, without anyone planning it, given him more than he'd lost. This is what true strength looks like from the inside. Not the 2 seconds in the cafe that 50 million people watched, but the 3 years of mornings before it. The braids, the permission slips, the gas station coffee, the estimates spread across a table, the quiet, unglamorous, renewable decision to show up every single day for the people who need you to. That is the only victory that doesn't fade when the headlines do. And Ethan Walker, the man they laughed at, the man they sued, the man they tried to bury under the weight of another man's shame, had been winning it every day for 3 years before the world ever knew his name.